Well, I had read the book, which was shocking and really, really well written. And yeah, that I had no. I mean, I've played characters in the CIA, and I read a complete history of that a long time ago, but I didn't know um, about the birth of the CIA. I mean, of the FBI or anything. But growing up in Texas, I actually grew up in a town outside of Waco, and there's a Texas Ranger Hall of Fame there in my hometown. So there was something really strange about and nice about playing this character in something that felt like I had, I don't know, it was a part of me, I guess. And I read, I think it's called Ashes of Glory or something, a history of the Texas Rangers, and that was really helpful and changed my perspective greatly, because it tells the honest story of the Texas Rangers, and you know, I was brought up to believe that they were these heroes, and I'm sure within that there you know, are some people that had some sort of moral compass, but my takeaway from that was that they were more of a gang that just kind of cleared the way for the white people, and did some really, really horrific things. So the fact that Tom White was a part of the Texas Rangers and managed to come out such an honest, good man that was, you know, treated everyone as equal and was such a voice of justice was, you know, intimidating to take on, because his goodness is so so amazing, you know, especially for that time. Before we started, I received this research packet from the Scorsese camp, and it just had basically everything you could ever want when you're building a character. He wrote a book that was really helpful, and like I said, I mean, Killers of the Flower Moon, the book went into pretty good detail about his upbringing, and yeah, so it was like everything else. It's a long process, and you just in the beginning are just trying to take in as much as you can and kind of find your way into it. But yeah, the research packet that they gave me was a huge help. That was a heavy one. I remember it took several takes for me to sort of find that, and yeah, it's very layered. On the one hand, you know, he's sort of Ernest is his responsibility, and it's such a tricky thing that he's navigating, and he's like just kind of made a breakthrough, and so on the one hand, I think he's thinking, what is going to happen to this man now, receiving this information, and you know, I have kids myself, and so I think that was part of why it was a struggle to find, because it's just horrific in a movie that there's just so much death. But yeah, Leo was obviously incredible in that scene, and yeah.
We optioned the book 7, 8 years ago, and it was a fascinating piece of forgotten history, but it was told from the perspective of the FBI. And we developed a screenplay soon after that. But there was a dynamic missing there that we ultimately felt that we weren't getting to the heart of the story. We weren't immersed in the Osage community the way we wanted to be. And there was 2 short sequences of Ernest and Mollie together, which was this insanely bizarre love story, something that was hard to fathom in a lot of ways, how this woman stuck by someone who was so duplicitous. But it was true. All of it was true. And so from that point on, we said to ourselves, well, what if we take the chance in getting to the heart of this story and the Osage community and this insane dynamic in Oklahoma at that time and what was going on? What if we made it about, Mollie and Ernest? And that was another 4-year journey of rewriting and once again going to Oklahoma to meet with the Osage. There was another chapter of development of getting even further into the truth of that story and trying to be as honest as we possibly could about the atrocities that occurred. But it was really, when we made that shift to it being about Ernest and Mollie and their love for one another, it opened up a whole new arena of ideas for us, and it took on a whole new life of its own.
One of the biggest responsibilities I felt about this role and the way that I had to occupy the space of Mollie was that I'm not Osage from the community. I have access points being Blackfeet and Nez Perce and growing up on the Blackfeet Reservation. We don't have something like the Reign of Terror, but we have our own history with not being able to manage our own finances for a time, with, a lot of the things that I think a lot of contemporary Native Americans feel and understand. But walking in, Indian country is an incredibly diverse place, and Osage country was foreign to me walking into it. And Oklahoma has a different history than Montana does, where I grew up. So I knew that because I had to be in this position where I'm, in a way, an access point for the audience to fall in love with Native women and to care about Native women in a really deep way. It's like the way that happens is I had to fall in love with everybody I was around. I had to fall in love with my sisters, and that was effortless. And also with a level, within the community, it's not my community, but I had to carry it as if it were, as if they were stories from my family, as if I think that's kind of the root of empathy, and it's one of the reasons that I love being an actor, is you're serving as an access point for other experiences, and you're kind of broadening a cultural understanding of what it means to be human by doing so. So, yeah, I feel like there's no way I could really, really ever understand or truly embody what it would have meant to be an Osage woman at that time, because it's unimaginable, the things that this community had to deal with. And it's horrendous how erased it was. On early research with Leah, we were sitting down going through some of the court documents and the testimonies from this, and people were talking about the house blowing up. And in the documents from this and the court transcripts, they only talked about Bill Smith, the character played by Jason Isbell. There was no mention of Rita. We were sitting there looking at these just court transcripts on, this very fragile old paper that we were being very, very tender with. And it's you don't necessarily feel like you're going to be moved by a court document, but I had to stop. We had this nice system where I was handing you pages and we were turning them over and being careful as we were both reading and everything, and then you were kind of waiting for me to hand you the page and wasn't getting it because I was crying over the lack of Rita in this paper. So that kind of took me by surprise that I was moved the way that I was in that moment, but it made it so incredibly clear that me being in this role is a responsibility for this is a responsibility for this community that has been so erased out of their own history, starting with these court documents before any writer gets a hand on it, So it's vital that this history be explored that way, and I'm so grateful that Marty also, in addition to this being so, it's Killers of the Flower Moon, the book is there. It was also, the heartbeat of it was so shaped by a book written about this time from an Osage perspective called A Pipe for February by Charles Redcorn. And, I encourage people to read that because copy-paste, there's elements of that book that are very clearly in the movie in a very certain way. But the tone of that book and the sense of the relationships between the sisters but in the community, the photographs that you see, the way that, the book invites you into what that perspective is, the way that the community invites you into what their perspective is. Because if you're there and you're receptive and you're open, they'll share it. It's you don't push too hard because we're talking about trauma, but people are willing to share and yeah, basically read A Pipe for February.
Well, originally I was drawn to the story by the book by David Grann, which delineates this extraordinary tragedy in American history that I really knew nothing about. And the script was given to me, and this was in 2017. And I understood immediately that trying to approach this material, particularly the nature of this tragedy, one would have to do it from the point of view of the Osage, and not the Osage as victims, but as people, to really get to know who they are, to understand as much as possible the values and their appreciation of the world around them and the life. And so at one point, while we were working on finishing the film Irishman, we talked about where is the heart of the story. This systemized kind of racist tragedy occurred, and yet many of the white people that were there who were perpetrating it were still very good friends with some of the Osage. So what is that about as part of being a human being? And Leo said, well, what about Ernest, the character Ernest Burkhart, whom he plays in the film now? He was going to play another character. He said, what about him? Because he's married to Mollie. He had to have had something to do with these murders. We don't know what to this day. And yet, she stayed with him. And I said, well, she loved him, and he loved her. Did he really love her? I think he did. Is he weak, strong, whatever, and he was manipulated by his uncle? Okay, we know all that. But by going into the love story, which, by the way, was more than hinted at, but was explained to me by the Osage themselves. They said, don't forget, this is they were in love, Ernest and Mollie. And I said, well, let's find out how. I don't know how people could be in love. I can't describe that. It's just that we can't express it. But there's something, a bond between the two of them where she trusted and trusted to the very end. And I think that's part of the tragedy of trusting people who come from a culture where we think we're superior. And we think the other cultures have to be, I'm American European, so it's the European culture, the Western culture is superior, so everything else gets wiped out. It's not that simple, because there are values there, and it's part of the human condition. And so for us, this project was something that as you say, shine a light, certainly, on this time in history. And coincidentally, in 1921, while this was happening in Pawhuska and in Fairfax, Tulsa was burning. It was the Black Wall Street was going. And we didn't know anything about that until a couple of years ago. And so this was systematic, you know. The country was made by white Europeans. That's it. Yeah, but the democracy and freedom for all and the pursuit of happiness for all, you see. This is what we wanted to get into. And the only way I thought we could do it was to go to the heart of it, really. I was going to say minimalist in a way. Go from the center and then come out, not from the outside in. Well, as I said, I felt that when I first read, we even took the book, I said, if you're going to be dealing with indigenous people, I said, we're going to have to know them. We simply have to know them. And so what that means is they have to be with us, you know, and it's got to be different from the way other films were made about them or about their world. And so automatically, once the script was in progress, we sent a group of people to meet Chief Standing Bear. And then I was brought out to meet them just before the COVID epidemic. And so once meeting them, I understood that I understood even more that we have to be extremely careful. And not, as I pointed out earlier, not stuffy, not prissy with everything. That has to be lived in and felt. And so in learning about how a blanket is worn and what the designs of a blanket mean, we learn who the people are. And we get to know each other. And it really was interesting. It really was. And it's something that's always fascinated me about American indigenous people and First Nations. And so I was, fascinated by it. And I tried to get as much as I could into what they put into the film. They also, as you know, so many of the Osage not only were in front of the camera, but also behind the camera, making, designing and helping making the costumes and all the props. Because a lot of this had been forgotten. Even the language has been forgotten. There's only Van Bighorst and Chris was the other guy. He taught the actors how to speak Osage, including Leo and De Niro. And so they were learning their language again. And the young people are coming back, you see, for their rituals now. And the young people are the young Osage are coming back and understanding now the value of who they are and what their nation was and still is, And so this is something that happened, a kind of a rebirth in a way, we hope. I found that Grann's book comes from the FBI point of view. And Hoover sent in Tom White, did a good job. White. He found these guys, whatever. He worked it out. In order to understand that, you read the book. But the issue is, they did make a mark by going into that town and stopping Bill Hale and Ernest and Byron and all of them. The Schoen brothers, all of them. But as I say, Byron, there was a hung jury. He didn't go to jail. The Schoen brothers went to practice in Colorado Springs for the rest of their lives. They were fine. Bill Hale was released on good behavior through the Truman administration, the Prendergast machine in the Midwest that runs that political group that Truman came out of. And Ernest stayed the longest, in jail. But for me, I felt that coming out of what the FBI did, they began the story of the FBI with the Osage murders, which became the story of the American outlaws of the Midwest, Babyface Nelson and Bunny and Clyde and Ma Barker, and all of these that the FBI became G-men, and they became theater. They became theater, and theater went right to the public, entertainment, radio shows. They actually had radio shows on the Osage murders. And I have the scripts. And I said, well, this is it. We have to end it as, in a sense, the tragedy becomes theater. And it supports the law that went in there. They did go in, it's true, and they did get them. But it became theater. And I felt ultimately it had to end with the obituary of Mollie, because that brings it way down. In other words, nothing is solved. It's an ongoing problem. You see, we don't want to just end it and say, okay, everybody's in jail. No. Yeah, they went to jail, yes. It doesn't matter. It's an ongoing problem. And so I chose to do that obituary myself, thinking about my own family, thinking about immigrants coming into this country, thinking about my grandparents who were immigrants who came here and the troubles they had. And somehow it just hit. I don't know what happened. And I said, I have to take the responsibility of trying it myself and bringing it back to the earth, you know. But the radio show was a very popular, gangbusters, the G-Man, all that sort of thing. And of course, the FBI became very, very somewhat difficult in the 50s and 60s in terms of controlling people and blackmailing. But in any event, that was Mr. Hoover. But he started there. He started there with the Osage, and he got them. And so I felt, in an odd way, the tragedy becomes grist for the mill of entertainment. That's all it is. And then it's dispensed with, And so I said, no, we have to make a mark here somehow.
Well, on this one, I was aware that Leo and Marty had this project, and they were talking about asking me, or Marty were asking me to do it, and we were working out Irishman too, and so on. So at one point I said, I told them, I'll do it, I'll commit to it. I didn't even know, I wasn't quite sure Hale was what, that's all I knew. Then later they told me that they want to change what the book was doing and make it more about the relationship with Ernest and Hale. So I said, yeah, that sounds good. And that was it. Then I waited for the script. And then we worked on it in pieces, went over it, and as I remember, and we're going over it during the shooting, sort of titrating it, if you will, because of his relationship with Mollie, the poisoning and all that, and how much he knew or didn't know or half knew, and then my involvement and all that. So it was all kind of just making sure we were doing it in the right way. Well, as I've been saying, I don't know certain things about him. What he did is so awful. There were certain things I could understand, but I feel that he did love the Osage, or thought he loved them, but somehow felt entitled to do what he did. I don't know how that is. I know he knew he was doing something wrong, possibly, but rationalized to himself that he was doing it for some sort of greater good, whatever that is.
Right.
His own family, whatever that was, but he had his family. I don't know. It's one of those things that you don't always know the motivations of characters. Sometimes it's more easy, and even then, characters don't know themselves. So I just did my best.